heavy-hitting financial analyst. Today, Reggie Middleton is stepping in as educational analyst. Turns out, add to his bag of tricks, he's also been a teacher for his kids. We're going to hear why he is so hard on the educational system today and what some of his solutions are. Reggie, it's nice to see you there in New York, looking good as always.
Well, thank you very, very much.
All right. So you're a financial analyst. We are used to you coming on here and sparing no words when it comes to something like Goldman Sachs and what the vampire squid is missing when it comes to financial analysis. But what inspired you to go after the American educational system?
Well, I don't feel I'm going after the American education system. I'm pretty much calling it as it is. I've had experience with it. I was born and raised in America. I have 3 children, and I've been through the education system at least 4 times personally between myself and the 3 children. At first, I was naive, thinking that the American education system was not working. And with that ideal, you're basically banging your head against a brick wall. But once you take a step back and learn basically how things work, you realize that the education system is working. If the goal of the education system is to create fodder for the higher capitalist classes to increase their wealth. Basically, you need a bunch of foot soldiers to fight a war, and not everybody could be a general. And that is, in a nutshell, if I had to encapsulate it in one sentence, what the American education system is doing. Unfortunately, as industry changes and you go from an industrial and manufacturing society to an information-based service society, that model, that mindset tends to fall apart, and that risks having the entire country fall behind, potentially fall behind other countries in terms of economic output.
So let's really break this down, Reggie, because kind of the core of what you get to in your blog post that you wrote recently was that academic education is not the solution. You kind of just talked a little bit about why. You went on in your blog to say that this is creating an army of slaves, or a slave army of rule followers. So what really is the solution to that you think will help people actually advance as opposed to becoming workers?
The solution is to teach the students in school how to be successful. In lieu of teaching them how to pass a test, with said tests basically preparing students to work for somebody else. Now, success, as a definition, I'll use my personal definition, does not necessarily encompass making more money or more money than somebody else. Success is basically accomplishing your goals, with the goal should be freedom and happiness. In a capitalistic society, it is very difficult to have freedom, independence, without some form of wealth. So I think it'd be very difficult to leave wealth out of the equation, but I also don't want any of your listeners to think that this is a wild dash for money, like Wall Street, the movie, which is not. It's
well, that's a good distinction. I want you to make that distinction because you were writing about, money isn't, you teach your kids, money isn't to buy things. You're talking about the importance of money in a different way. What do you see money and wealth as achieving in this society economically for people?
Yeah. Well, I tell my children, simply tell them that money is a proxy for labor. Without money, you have to work, and if once you gain money or capital, you can use that money or capital as a proxy for your labor and potentially others' labor. When you ask those who are, this is a very controversial topic, but I'm going to come out and say it.
Go for it.
Lower in the socioeconomic ladder, on the lower rungs, you ask many, or when I've asked many people what money was, or the purpose of money, the first thing out of their mouth is to buy things. Money is to buy, and then usually name, consumer trinkets, electronics, jewelry, cars, etc. But from my perspective, and I believe from the perspective of those who are successful in building longer-term legacies and building wealth, money is a proxy for labor. The more money you have, the less you have to work yourself, and the more money you have, the more control you have over other both sources of labor and sources of productive income. And it's leverage. It builds upon itself. A moderate amount of money begets more money, which becomes a larger amount of money, which begets more money, which becomes an even larger amount, which causes a significant imbalance between the wealthy and those who are not. But if the schools were truly doing their job, they would teach people basically what money is, teach people class consciousness, and create a dash for mobility where everybody would try and climb up the ladder versus being content and sitting in a cubicle making somebody else wealthy. Now, everybody cannot be wealthy. You know, you need worker bees, you need those in the middle, you need those on the top. But if those on the top are able to remain there, static in the status quo, without any competition, and then the quality of those on the top tend to stagnate. And that, in general, creates a stagnant country. What you want is constant competition for everybody to crawl up to the top of the ladder. And, so you have room for 3 people on the ladder. There are 100 people. You want to fight with 103 people to get on top.
To get on top of that ladder.
You know, yeah, you want about 4 or 5 people competing out of 103.
And you make the point
you just
that
don't have the diversity.
And you make the point with people up there on the top staying the same, getting complacent, that is really the real threat, where countries that are hungry for this, that are fighting for this, that are fighting to be on top, that's where they're going to make gains over the United States, that's a real problem, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's in a nutshell.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, because you're talking about incorporating things like wealth, the pursuit of wealth, class consciousness in education. What about the fact, you even point to a sociologist who talked about the power elite and what they do, how they move up the ladder, and they use their connections, they use their insular access to institutions to move up in a way that other people can't. So how are average people ever going to be able to compete with those kind of connections and that kind of status?
Well, one thing is to learn. You look at nobody, in general, everybody has an equal opportunity until networks are formed to insulate that opportunity. So if you take this world and shook it up and threw it on the ground, everybody would start from scratch. Everybody would probably have a similar opportunity. Some will climb up and some won't. Those who have climbed up are going to create mechanisms to prevent competition because they don't want to be knocked down from the top of the ladder. One way to get up there is to learn how everybody else got to the top. So if you learn how everybody else got to the top, you replicate the methods that they use to get to the top. That should be the purpose of schooling. Okay, but schools don't teach that. They don't teach you how to get to the top. Your first grader, your average 5th grader doesn't learn entrepreneurialism in school. They definitely don't learn class structure, class consciousness. They don't learn geopolitical power structures. These things are foreign. You talk to a kindergarten or 1st grade teacher, and some of them are still stuck on things such as penmanship and grammar. Of course, there's a place for that, but when you have entire school systems and entire cities focused on how to pass an academic test versus how to make more competitive children, then you're breaking the system and you're creating, also-rans in the school system.
You bring up a lot of...
Nobody gets paid. I just want to make this point.
Yeah.
Nobody that I know of personally gets paid for taking a test. I can't think of one person. It might be different down there in D.C., but I don't know anybody who gets paid for taking tests. I
don't know anybody that gets paid for taking a test either, but I do know people that get paid for breaking rules. And I think it's interesting that you're bringing this up because it's a conversation we've had here amongst the capital account team. Because let's just say that I work with some rule breakers, and I've noticed the limitations of always growing up being taught to follow the rules, just do what you're told, be the straight A student, that's how you excel, that's how you succeed. And then you get it out into the real world and you really learn the value of not always doing what you're told, and you see how much more that can actually get you in terms of innovative thinking and taking the actions you need. That's my 2 cents. I want to continue this conversation with you, Reggie, because I know you think that this all plays into some of the economic problems we're seeing, some of the groupthink that is continuing the economic problems we're seeing. I want to get into all of those discussions with you. We're just going to go to a break, but we'll be back with more with Reggie Middleton. Still ahead, $86 billion. That's the hole the U.S. Treasury has to fill from December, so no wonder the federal government had a contest to try to save some money. The winner, though, no shocker there, a guy from NASA. But just wait until you hear his scientific solution. First, your closing market numbers.
We just put a picture of me when I was like 9 years old on To Tell the Truth.
I have a confession. I am a total ghetto princess. I love rap and hip-hop music and Christian music.
thought he was kind of a dick yesterday.
I'm very proud of the role that Al Jazeera has played.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
What drives the world?
The fear-mongering used by politicians.
Who makes decisions?
Considerable breakthrough has already been made.
Who can you trust?
No one who is imbued with a global missionary zeal.
Where are we heading?
State-controlled capitalism is called fascism.
When nobody dares to ask, we do. RT, question more.
All right, back to independent thinking. Here is one of our favorite examples of it that we caught on to online. Take a look.
Because the companies who make these try to trick the girls into buying the pink stuff instead of stuff that boys want to buy, right?
Right. If she's really got that figured out on her own, I just hope it doesn't get stamped out. But is society and our education system stamping it out? And when these people grow up to be Wall Street analysts, for example, what are they missing? Entrepreneurial investor Reggie Middleton is back to tell us. Reggie, I want to bring you back into the conversation. As far as the people that have grown up in this educational system, gone to the best schools, come from the best families, or made it there and end up on Wall Street, you talk about a group think that this has led to, that has contributed to the economic crisis in 2008 and some of the economic problems we see today. How so?
Well, when everybody crowds to one side of the boat, it doesn't matter if that boat is going in the correct direction. It flips over. That's what happens when you don't have diversity, whether it's diversity genetically, from idealism, or even weight distribution on a watercraft. And that's basically what happened during the credit crisis. Any 10-year-old child, okay, can sit there and look at the incidences or the events that led up to the crisis and could have pointed out, this isn't right, you know, this is unstable and I don't think it's going to end well. But despite that, you have a raft of PhDs, award-winning analysts, bankers, central bankers, politicians, regulators, etc., who somehow did not see this coming, despite the fact it was the largest run-up in housing in the history of this country, even greater than that of the gold rush, despite the fact you had credit flowing to dead people getting mortgages, and despite the fact it was easily seen. The reason is everybody was taught to do the same thing, look at everything the same way. Even as the bubble started busting, you had companies who were obviously insolvent, such as Bear Stearns. How many analysts had a sell on Bear Stearns, 4 months before they went bust? Nobody. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think my blog was the only entity that publicly declared that Bear Stearns was insolvent. The same for Lehman Brothers. There were 2 or 3 other investors who were the student investors who did it. Same thing for General Growth Properties. These were obvious imbalances in the system, but the imbalances that couldn't be seen because everybody was taught to look at things the same way, act the same way. They went to the same schools with the same professors, with the same curricula, with the same ideals, graduated, went to the same banks, using the same trades, with the same methods and techniques, with the same assets. There's no diversity. That lack of diversity creates, you know, a lopsided system.
So a Harvard degree didn't mean that you were going to see the financial crisis coming, and in fact, a ton of people missed it. You saw it. How is this playing out today? Because you're talking about 2012 predictions, how a lot of people see kind of the broader threat to be Iran. You have your eyes on another country entirely. Tell us who it is and why.
Yeah. I think maybe the biggest threat to stability would probably be Germany, for the mere fact that Germany is the linchpin that's holding the entire sovereign debt debacle together. You have a lot of entities such as banks and insurers who are highly leveraged into European nations, and you have these European nations bonds who are trading at discounts of up to 80–85% of par of what they were issued at. With such large discounts and such large losses, the portfolios of these financial companies have taken losses of 9, 10, 12%, but you would think the losses would be much, much greater. The reason they haven't been greater is because they are also invested in Germany, which gives them diversification. Germany's bonds have traded very recently negative, which means you literally have to pay Germany to lend them money.
Yeah, right.
So because Germany's bonds have went up so much, it has counteracted the losses of many other countries. Now, the issue is Germany is a net export nation, which means they export, they make their living, their economy strives off of exporting to their trading partners, which is the balance of the EU, China, Japan, and the United States. All of their major trading partners range from having a hard economic landing to going into recession or being in recession to actually risking a quasi-semi-depression. So if you're a net export nation and your job is exporting and the people who are buying your exports are broke, you know, things are not looking up. Despite that, their bonds are trading above par at issuance. So what happens if you just have the bonds come back to par or trade to what they historically traded at over the last several years? If you did that, you have entities who will take a 30% loss in tangible equity, which means they're worth 30% less instantaneously. That's just if Germany were to go back to a normal trading range.
Okay.
The profligate nations trade at a spread to Germany, which means they're trading for less. So if Germany goes down, Greece, Portugal, etc., will go down significantly more. That will wipe out the equity of many insurers, banks, pension funds, etc. So imagine if you woke up one day and none of your insurance claims were getting paid, your insurance benefits were totally wiped out, and your bank just didn't open.
It's a scary word, Reggie. It's a scary world. It's a really interesting point that you bring up. Going back to the point of education, though, just because I want to get to that before we go, you kind of tried your hand at trying to make an impact, make inroads in this area. You taught a class for your kids in schools when you were seeing the impact that all of this was having on them, and you ended up getting the boot from the principal because it was just too successful, in your words. So do you have any hope that the education system is going to change? I mean, it seems like a real pipe dream to put into schools what you're actually talking about thinking they will need.
Well, it won't change without a significant paradigm shift. Basically, the system has to be reset. You do understand what I said when we first started the interview. The education system is working in a way. It's working to create, I hate to use the word slaves, but a quasi-caste system of workers to create wealth for those higher up on the food chain. And that's why when you said when you went to school, you were taught to follow the rules and do this and do that, do understand the rules are there for a reason. Those higher up in the food chain created rules to keep you walking the path that they need you to walk. If you break those rules, you compete with them. If you follow those rules, you make them wealthy.
That's a little conspiratorial what you're saying, Reggie. You really believe that's a little conspiratorial? I got to run. We're almost out of time. But do you really believe it's a concerted effort?
Well, I wouldn't call it conspiracy. I see it as plain vanilla. Let's take of a rule as you should go and get a job and work for yourself and stick with one company. You do that in lieu of becoming an entrepreneur and competing with those who own that company. If you had a choice and you own the company, would you make a rule that says try your best to be an entrepreneur and compete, or come work for me, sit in the cubicle, and make a certain wage with security? And the security is alleged security because you see companies going bust regularly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So do you think it's conspiracy or there's logic behind it?
Well, I think that you have some good logic behind it. I appreciate you being on the show and sharing it with us because it's all really interesting stuff. I'm glad that you took off your, well, you still had your financial hat on, but this is an interesting way to apply it, that we love all the cowboys that aren't part of the herd here on Capital Account. Thanks, Reggie. That was Reggie Middleton, entrepreneurial investor and a Boom Bust blog. All right, before we we go, let's hit up a little loose change with our peanut gallery here, our producer Dimitri Kofinas and Shannon Donahoe in the control room, because the Treasury released its monthly deficit today. Just a little trivia, the number hasn't been positive, hasn't been a surplus since 2008. Luckily, the government came up with a contest to save some federal dollars. So who had the best plan? Well, it was a guy from NASA. Check it out.
It's like using a tool shed. Everyone has one at their house and everyone has a toolbox. When you need a hammer, you go, you use your hammer and you bring it back.
It's a great idea. I don't know why we didn't think of it before.
Yeah, his brilliant idea was to create a tool library for space projects so NASA wouldn't have to buy the same tools over again. Can you think of one thing more pathetic? This is the most solution that I've ever heard. I mean, come on, that just seems pretty standard. I don't think you would enter a contest with this to win the prize.
So you don't know this, but I just thought of this now. There's actually a story, I don't know if it's true, but apparently the U.S. NASA spent $1 million or something, some extraordinary amount of money developing a ballpoint pen that could write in space, right? Because normally you need the ink to drop with gravity. The Russians did it with a pencil. So, like, basically,
that's a great point.
The government looks for ways to waste and spend money. So this guy was basically like, yeah, just why don't you just take these old tools, just reuse them? And they're like, we didn't think of that. We just thought we had to waste money all day long because that's what we do. This guy's obviously pissing off a lot of contractors down in Florida. But nevertheless,
do you think this guy's going to get ousted? He's like the whistleblower for waste, fraud, and abuse.
Right.
He's like blowing the whistle on the fact that they're remaking everything.
They're like, what are you doing? Shut up. Like, we make money from waste. So,
Shannon, do you want to weigh in here?
Just a correction on the space pen. It was only $20.
What are you talking about?
The space pen that writes in space.
You were talking about development. Or you're talking about the price?
Yeah, development. But I don't know
think it costs more than $20 to develop. I would wager to guess.
Shannon, I got you here, Shannon. You sabotaged me again, but this time you are wrong, 100% guaranteed. We're going to look that up afterwards, and we're going to have to do a special.
I'll look into that.
You know what? You guys can duke it out later. We'll let you guys know who won. I want to move on to this story because a Barclays Capital study says the world's skyscraper mania over the past 140 years is actually not paying off. It's an indicator of an imminent financial collapse. The study points out the New York construction boom that the Chrysler and Empire State Building came out of preceded the Great Depression. Also, Dubai built the world's tallest building before having to be bailed out by Abu Dhabi. So the question of who's next, we don't know. I mean, China is home to 53% of the 124 skyscrapers currently under construction. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think this could actually be a predictor of financial crises? Who's trying to build the tallest skyscrapers and wasting all their money?
There's no question. Humanity never learns. From the Tower of Babel, right? Remember what God did? He destroyed the Tower of Babel, and he spread humanity across the globe so they would all babble about in different languages. Same thing, man. We have the Dubai. They're challenging. They're trying to build these cathedrals to space, to God, to become deities with credit. Credit being the kind of magic carpet for humanity. I don't see it working. They never learn.
Neither does Barclays, but maybe that's changing because there was a report that architecture majors are the highest unemployed coming out of school. Shannon, do you think this played out? You mentioned Chicago. You seem to be convinced.
I mean, Chicago has the world's first skyscraper. Back then, obviously, it was only 10 stories, but we all know how Chicago's economy turned out.
Yeah, not doing so well. That's it for our show, though. We'll have to let you figure out if you think this correlates, because that's all we have time for. I'm Lauren.